This is a conversation with Hayden, one of my dedicated students who has been on an inspiring journey of learning Polish. But this discussion goes far beyond just language learning. Hayden shares the personal story of meeting his Polish girlfriend at high school, describing how their relationship evolved from teenage years into adulthood, navigating life, language, and culture together. He reflects on his first surprising impressions of Poland, from expecting snow but finding scorching summers to embracing rural tranquility after a lifetime in bustling UK cities. But that's not all. We also explore British perceptions of Polish people and cultural stereotypes, the rewarding yet challenging realities of working for the NHS. Hayden's viral TikTok story featuring his adorable rescue dog Orange. The mysteries of social media algorithms and AI. How are they shaping our lives? Brexit's impact on multicultural relationships and families. My ultimate goal is to create the most engaging online Polish language course, and students like Hayden continuously inspire me and motivate me to make this vision a reality. But your involvement matters too. Together, let's build an extraordinary community of Polish learners worldwide. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know which topics and resources would best support you in your Polish learning journey. Thank you. So, the first question is, why did you start learning Polish?
I thought it was about time to start learning Polish, to be honest with you. So I've been with my partner for 11 years, and along the way, I've picked up bits of Polish, but not really that helpful. Can't make sentences of it. I can understand more than I can speak. Um, it felt like I needed to start taking it seriously at one point, and I'm not sure why 2025 was the year that I started taking it seriously and thought I really need to learn something here. But I did, and started and enjoy it. To be honest, it's good. It's good. But it felt like after 10 years, I have to start. I have to start making more of an effort. I think with learning, so I can feel more part of things. Really.
Yeah. So, what were the first things you learned?
Um, Honestly, probably food. Um, so I would go over to my partner's house when we were younger, and her mum would be making dinner for us. So I would learn what was, I don't know, kotlet samosa or, rosu or zupa pomidorowa, so those kinds of things. So I would learn those things. And then along the way, would pick up maybe related phrases like obiad or jestem głodny or that kind of thing. So I could do basic things, ask for a drink maybe. Um, I could say cześć, I could say do widzenia, that kind of thing, but nothing more sophisticated than probably 3-word sentences. Um, and I kind of picked up little bits like that for a while. And I remember the first time we went to Poland. So I've been 3 or 4 times, twice with the whole family driving from the UK to Poland, and I was there, and I was, oh, I don't understand anything. I had no idea what was going on. So that was a exposing experience, I think.
How did you meet your girlfriend?
We met in school, so we're sort of childhood sweethearts, I guess. So
Yeah.
we both went to the same high school in the UK. Um, she came to the UK when she was 7, I think, 2005, when Poland joined the EU. Um, Came to the UK, and we met in high school, but we were never, we were never in the same circles of people and friends in high school. But I don't know, one day we just our paths crossed, and we kind of, we say that we've been together since we're 15, but it's different being together when you're 15, 16, 17, and now when you're in your 20s living alone and that sort of thing. But childhood sweethearts, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And when was the first time you went to Poland?
It was, I think it was probably just as I was turning 18 or 19, so 2016, 17, around this time.
Yeah,
And Amanda and her family used to go basically every year. They would drive from the UK to Poland and stay for maybe 3 weeks, something like that, 3 4 weeks, and they'd been 2 or 3 times the previous couple of years, and in 1 year, her dad said, "You should ask Hayden if he wants to come." Um, and I couldn't say no, right? when you've been invited by the family, you can't say no. So we took the very long drive, spent 2 or 3 weeks, I think 3 weeks there. It was lovely. It was my first experience of Poland. It wasn't probably the picture I'd built of Poland in my head, which was strange because you have a perception of places that you haven't been to, probably, right? Um,
yeah.
but it was a great time. It was a really good time.
And what do you remember exactly?
I mean, firstly, the drive. My God, the drive through Germany is unbelievably long, and you're just sort of on the autobahn the whole way, and it's a long journey. But I remember getting into Poland and first thinking how sort of rural it was. Everything is countryside. There's just sprawling fields and hills and mountains everywhere, and I don't know if I was expecting that or not. But we went in July, sort of back end, maybe 25th of July sort of time. And it was so hot, so hot. We got there and it was probably 30 degrees, maybe going 35 degrees on some of the days. And that was my first reality check. I thought snows all year in Poland, it's cold all year in Poland. That was the perception I had in my head. And then when we got to where her family live, from a really small village. So that was I've grown up in big cities my whole life. So to go to a small village where there's maybe 2 or 3 shops, everyone knows each other. There's gardens, there's hillside. You can see the mountains. You can see all the individual blocks of apartments. It was a sort of different experience. I felt like I was in a completely different world, to be honest with you. And then I stepped out of the car. It's hot and I don't understand a word that anyone's saying around me. The noises you can hear around you. It's just loads of old Polish men talking about I don't know what. Maybe one day I'll find out what. But it wasn't
About
the
women?
experience I expected. But it was nice.
Yeah, they have probably talked about the women.
Probably it's probably that, or it's hot today, or yeah, I don't know. They're going to the shop to buy ham or something. Really boring normal things, but
Yeah,
I guess that's the Polish that I want to speak the normal stuff. I don't really want the phrases that everyone can know. I want to be able to converse with people. So one time when I go to Poland, I can feel like a Pole.
yeah.
That'd be good.
And were there many Polish kids at school, except
Uh,
your girlfriend?
there was a few. Yeah, there was a few. I mean, where we're from, uh, there's quite a lot of Polish people. So there is a Polish Catholic centre with the church and the Polish school for the kids on a Sunday. They use it for events and things. So there's I think quite a big Polish community in most big cities in England, to be honest. Um, but certainly where we're from, there was quite a lot of Polish people. Where we're living now, quite a lot of Polish people. You can go to the shop and sometimes hear so much Polish, you sort of feel like you're in a Polish store. Um,
Yeah.
so it's quite normal. I think it's quite a normal experience for most people living in England. I think.
So what do British people think about Polish people?
I don't
Maybe.
know. Don't know. I mean, clearly, I can't talk for every British person, but I think there's I think there's probably an assumption of being stoic and quite tough, probably because of what people understand the history to be of sort of Central and Eastern Europe. So I think there's an assumption of strength and probably masculinity in a way, and sort of a sort of particular idea of a man and strength and that sort of thing. I think there's a kind of understanding of people being hardworking, and a lot of, I think, a lot of Polish people that have migrated to the UK, particularly the men, there's kind of an assumption of working in manual labour jobs, building that sort of thing. So I think there's a hardworking sort of assumption. I think, I mean, I certainly thought this. I thought that everybody from Poland was really fair-skinned and blonde. That's not the case. Actually, I think I've probably encountered more Polish people that are darker skinned than I am and have brown hair and much more dark features. But I think a lot of people do think of it in that way. And then I think you probably get some of the more typical sort of stereotypes around drinking alcohol a lot, drinking vodka a lot, drinking beer a lot, that kind of thing. I think that's probably people's understanding of Polish people.
And what do you think personally after all these years with your Polish girlfriend and her family?
I think the stoic assumption is probably right. I think most Polish people that I've met are quite serious most of the time, and there's quite a, I think by contrast, English people have probably got a stereotype of being quite friendly, quite you talk to people in the street when you're walking by, you're sort of asking everyone if they're okay, that sort of thing. And I think the opposite is also true in Poland, that people are the same. You go to Poland, you walk down the street, people say hello, you go to the shop, you talk to the cashier in the shop and that sort of thing. But I think there is a more stoic and sort of reserved culture in people, and a lot more sort of insular thinking about themselves and less open in that way. But I think when you get to know more Polish people, my experience of the family is one of being very welcoming and sort of embracing me, even though I can't speak to half of them and they can't speak to me. There's just this sort of love and kind of embracing, and I think really kind of close family culture in Polish families that is probably a little bit different in English families, or at least my experience of that. And then I've got a perception of the Polish babcia, who's just the most loving person in the world and always trying to feed you and giving you pats on the head and giving you a hug and that sort of thing. So I think there's a reality to some of the assumption, but I think when you're part of the crowd, when you're in and accepted by Polish people, I think you get a warmer kind of perception of them.
So let's talk about English breakfast and Polish breakfast.
I like Polish breakfast. It's good. I mean, I'm not. I don't really eat breakfast that much, which is probably why I like Polish breakfast, because it's more components of a different breakfast. You maybe got your bread, you've got a ham, you've got probably a pickle on the side, and then maybe, I don't know, some sałatka or something like that to go along with it. Compared to the English, which is everything fried and on a plate, bacon, sausages, eggs, bread, beans, whatever else there is. It's quite a heavy breakfast, I guess. Yeah, I think I probably prefer Polish food generally, maybe.
Why?
Yeah, it feels comforting. I think it feels. I mean, away from the breakfast, right? Everything is just a meat and a potato, and then usually something pickled on the side. And I think if you asked me 10 years ago, would you like to eat pickled cabbage or pickled mushrooms or pickled peppers? No, I would say no, definitely. If you ask me now, yes, I want to take them home. When Amanda's mum makes them, we're getting a box full to take home. And there's just this kind of whole, kind of organic sort of feel to the food. It feels everything's homemade, everything sort of feels like it's made with care, and it just feels quite warm, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your favorite place in Poland?
So I haven't been to that many places. I've been to the village that Amanda and her family are from, which is probably around 1 to 2 hours away from Wrocław. So you get quite a different experience of, we've flown to Wrocław and you get a normal city feeling. And then we drive to Amanda's town, and it's small and it's nice. And I think there's a really nice contrast of our life to going there. Busy professional lives, working quite a lot, living near cities, everything's busy, and you're sort of going about life in a normal way that probably most people in the world do. And then you go to a really small town and you stay with a babcia for a week, and you open the balcony door, you step onto the balcony, and all you see is the działki, and there's just everywhere just looking lovely and peaceful and not much going on. So I like that. We did go to Karpacz the second time I went to Poland, which was incredible. I mean, we walked all the way up Śnieżka, the mountain. So, I was pretty tired. So I think I can sort of feel the pain in my legs when I'm talking about it, to be honest. But Karpacz was really nice, and we'd like to go to Zakopane. We like the kind of countryside, hillside walking, that sort of experience. But I think I like it feels like when you're in Poland, you have big cities, right? But it feels like the distance between the big cities is quite large. Whereas in England, we're in one city, it will take us 20, 30 minutes to get to the next one where we are. Whereas in Poland, it feels like you're driving through the countryside for an hour or 2 hours until you get to the next place. And I quite like how sparsely populated it is.
Yeah. And what places do you recommend in England or in the UK in general?
It depends what you like. I mean, I think England's a beautiful country. If you're not from England, you're not from the UK, you will probably think of a couple of things. You will think of London, first and foremost, because it's the capital, it's massive. London's a different experience to the rest of the UK, completely different. And the only times I ever go to London really are for professional reasons. It's not a place that I kind of go to enjoy. There are things to enjoy there if you like big cities. But I would say London is like every other big city in the world, with its own sort of parts of it. But it's like if you go to Paris, it's like if you go to Berlin, it's like if you go to Krakow or Warszawa. It's the same experience. When you get out of London, I think is where the UK gets interesting. So if you are ever visiting, you can just look on the map and look at the national parks. So there's loads. So there's probably 3 near where we are. So we're near to the Yorkshire Dales, we're near to the Peak District. Then there's a Lincolnshire Wold somewhere. You can go to the Cotswolds, and that is countryside, sprawling hills. You can go to the Lake District, which is quite popular in the UK. And if you like the idea of relaxation and sort of being in nature around cows and sheep and that sort of thing, that's lovely. If I was to choose a big city that I like in England, I'd probably choose Manchester, but maybe that's for sports affiliated reasons. I'm gonna tie to Manchester, but I quite enjoy Manchester for the food and the sort of shopping and the sort of town. It's quite nice. And then outside of England, but still in the UK, Edinburgh is pretty nice. In Scotland, pretty nice part, and Scotland's lovely. We haven't spent lots of time there, but Scotland again has lots of sort of national parks. They have lots of lochs, big lakes, and things of that nature. So there's plenty to do here. There's plenty to do. I feel like a travel guide for the UK, but it's a really beautiful country, I think. But I think maybe not appreciated.
Yeah. Um, I'll ask you also about your job, if you can tell me a few things about the NHS.
Yeah. So working for the NHS, I think, is you're a public servant in the same way that I think every country has public sector jobs, civil service jobs, that sort of job. So I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse in the slightest. But I think it takes a certain type of person to work for public services generally, and you've got to, I think, be drawn to it for the right sort of moral and ethical reasons. So I think when most people think about England, maybe this is also one of the things people think about. They think about the NHS, and it's our sort of biggest and most prized institution, I think. And to work for the NHS in a sort of managerial capacity, I think is I think it's challenging, as all public services are, but I think probably one of the biggest privileges you can have in a professional career like mine. And that's because you're thinking about every day the difficulties that people will be aware of and read about. And you're thinking about the millions of people that use the services and need the services to survive and live a good life. And I think the idea that you can spend a lot of your time and brain power thinking about how to resolve some of those issues and how to make things better and run more efficiently and to improve people's experience of those services, but also the impact that has on their life and how much they can live a good life and good and sort of happy life. I think is it's what drew me to the NHS when I was thinking, I think this is where I want to work. But it's certainly what's kept me in the NHS when things are tough. It's that kind of idea that it's tough for a reason. You're getting something out of it that's not just about the outcome for you. It's not just about your personal and professional development, which is clearly good for, and it's clearly part of why you do anything. But when you have a tough week or a tough day or a tough month or whatever that might look like, you kind of you have the normal human reaction of going, oh, that was hard. But then you can sort of sit down and think, okay, but if I get this right, the impact that I'm making might improve the life of 1 million people, 500,000 people. Even if it's 1,000 people, 1,000 people it's the impact is one that you can't really quite conceptualize in your head. If you think of even in the NHS, right? If you could be a doctor, a nurse, a mental health practitioner, whatever that looks like, and you're having really important interactions on a day-to-day basis with people, one-to-one. That's your interaction, and that's what makes the NHS work. That's the kind of heartbeat of the NHS and the heartbeat of most public services. And you can go home probably at the end of the day and you could think about the interaction that you've had with that other one person and how that made you feel and how you made them feel and the impact you've had for better or for worse. And that's, I think, in the human consciousness is quite easy to understand and rationalize. When I sit at my laptop and I write a paper that needs to be approved by a board to improve the lives of 1 million people, 2 million people, or less, as I've said, you can't quite visualize how many people that really is. And I think when you take the time to process that and visualize that, there's a probably a twofold response. One is sort of overwhelming because you're looking, going, well, 1 million people. You're probably never going to visually see sat in front of you 1 million people in your life, right? If you think about the biggest
Yeah,
sports stadiums in the world, maybe 120,000 people, and
yeah,
that's hard to conceptualize. So you can't conceptualize the 1 million people. And then the second one is kind of the thing that I came back to about why I joined and why I stay, of kind of pride in the kind of part that you've played in a really big and complex system, but you've managed to navigate that and hopefully make a positive difference. So I think it's a huge privilege to work for the NHS, to work in public services generally, and you've got to hang on to the reason you started and the reason you continue, because of the difficulties that you face, really.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm asking you about the NHS because, I lived in the UK for 5 years, and I also lived in other countries, and for some reason, there is also a huge discussion about the NHS in the UK, and it's not like that about, the health services in other countries. So, I thought maybe you can tell me what are the biggest challenges right now,
Mm,
and are there any solutions that you can see, like which can be implemented?
mm, mm. So I will answer your question, but so you're saying where you are now, there's not really a public discussion on healthcare. That's not popular.
No, not only here when I'm now, but also in other countries that I lived,
Mm,
and maybe that's because the NHS is just so unique in
maybe.
comparison to other countries.
Yeah, it's really interesting because by contrast, I if you turned on BBC News every day of the week, just for 1 week, I suspect you would see a good handful of stories about the NHS or the state of health in the United Kingdom, that sort of thing. So it's a really normal discussion point, that I think everyone's got a pretty. I think everyone's got a level of understanding about the health system in the UK that lives in the UK, and like I said, I think it's our prized institution. So if you typically look at data that's published by there's a annual data set published in the UK called the British Social Attitudes Survey, and they poll people in the country on all sorts of things: what they think about the economy, what they think about gender or sexuality, healthcare, loads of things. And healthcare is typically one of the most valued parts of people's lives. So if they ask the question, do you think we should keep the NHS? I would suspect 95% of people would say yes, absolutely. But then if you ask people the same question of, are you happy with the NHS? What do you think about the way the NHS is working? You get a more complicated response, and you get a response that looks something like, when I interact with the NHS, when I get my doctor's appointment, when I get my hospital appointment, I'm pretty happy with the NHS. People are pretty satisfied with what they get. But there is often a response that also goes something like, but it's too hard to get in. It's too hard to get access. I have to wait for too long to see my GP, to see a dentist, to get a hospital appointment. So I think your question, what are the big problems? There's a challenge there, which is that people are happy with what they get when they get it, but they're not happy perhaps with how quickly they get it. And I think there's a few probably interesting things in there. One is, I think a lot of health services around the world, and it's certainly true of the NHS in England, there's still a post-pandemic recovery ongoing, because essentially what happened, right, is services were scaled down to a minimum, and the collective effort of the country was to testing people, managing COVID outbreaks when that happened, and preventing further COVID outbreaks happening. So there was a shift in the health system, and 5 years on, I think that shift is still being felt, because essentially what that means, right, is if you needed, I don't know, a knee operation, a hip operation, or anything in between, you were otherwise waiting. So that list was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At the same
Yeah,
time, the other quite complicated thing that was happening is people weren't going out for, we were in this country locked down for periods of time repeatedly. So people perhaps that were developing a health need weren't having that health need met, whether that was a physical one or a mental health one that happens as a result of you being isolated for months from people, from that normal human interaction. So there's a a recovery that I think is still ongoing and will need to be ongoing for some time. And that explains probably some of why some people are experiencing a difficulty in accessing health services and the satisfaction with accessing it at a timely at a timely pace. I think the other reason, or one of the other reasons, there are loads of really complicated reasons, but people are changing, right? So the way we interact with the world is so much different to how we interacted with the world in 2000, right? So that's
Yeah,
25 years ago.
yeah,
What's different? I can order something on Amazon and it will probably come today. If not, it will definitely come tomorrow. Um, I can Google anything. So if I'm worried about the fact that I've got a cough, I can Google, why do I have a cough? And increasingly, people are getting to grips with digital solutions to their problems using whatever form of AI you wish to use that can think for you or think on your behalf or aid your thinking. And the health services that we've got largely reflect more what you would expect in 2000, 2010. So you call your GP, and the GP is a big part of the health system in England. You call your GP, you say, can I have an appointment? I've got a problem. Go to see your GP. If they're able to treat you and diagnose you, they will. They might prescribe you a medicine. They might suggest a way to look after your health. If they're not, they'll refer you to the hospital or one other set of services, basically, and you will wait, and then you will see the service. People aren't used to that. People are used to picking up their phone, going on their app, clicking order, getting it the next day. And so there's a need to
true,
probably think
true.
about how you meet those needs in a similar way, ultimately. Um, and I think the final sort of bucket of challenge, but um, I guess the way that I like to think about this in my job, and this helps you maintain a semblance of order and sort of happiness in what you do, is that if there's a challenge, there is a solution somewhere, and there is an opportunity somewhere to do something creative and impactful. But the final thing that's quite difficult is one of the best things about health services generally and modern medicine is people live for a pretty long time, and people generally live um, relatively healthy lives, but then they get to a point in their life where health starts to deteriorate, linked to your age, or linked to various social things ongoing. Um, we see worse sort of reported mental health amongst younger people, potentially because of use of social media is one of the sort of common speculations, but also probably more complicated factors, really. And with the role of health and medicine, people getting older, populations getting bigger as a result of that age, but also migration flows and things, there are a lot more people demanding services now. And there's a question as to how you meet all of that need in the most effective and efficient way. And with changing not only size of population, but almost cohorts within the sort of millions of people that live in England, each of those cohorts of people, those sort of individual population groups, have quite different needs, and some have more need than others. Some have more complicated needs to meet than others. Some have needs that are about their health, but also about more social problems, whether it might be access to work or something of that nature. So there are quite a complex set of problems that the health service is trying to deal with, that it has to deal with other partners in public services. So we have in the UK the NHS. We also have local authorities that are more responsible for access to work, access to education, the local economy, things of that nature. And those two things interact with each other massively. But the size of the population has grown. It's become more complex. And then the two other problems that challenges we've already described sort of interact
Yeah.
with one another, and you try to grapple with those to create access to services, people that are satisfied with their services, and sustainable services on a kind of multi-year basis. So that's the quite complex problems. I suspect you can transplant those problems to other systems in the world as well.
Yeah, I think really the whole system is extremely complicated. And as you said, this was very interesting. People expect, health services to work, like Amazon or just type and you get what you want, but it's
Mhm.
not that simple at all. And I really, I think the job of doctors, nurses, people like you who are somewhere in the like background of all these services, I think this is extremely complicated job, and it's like you sometimes you just sacrifice your own pleasure and life just to help other people. So um,
Yeah, but that gives me
yeah,
pleasure as well. You know, and it is difficult. It can be really difficult, but the idea that at the end of the day, you can think, I hope I've made a difference to somebody else's life that's not just my own, can give you a sense of fulfillment too. And I guess that's the question, right? Where do you find your fulfillment? Do you find your fulfillment in, I don't know, trading stocks, or do you find your fulfillment in this sort of
TikTok,
stuff? Trading stock, you know, on
TikTok.
foreign exchange markets. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
I know, but I'm saying you can find it on TikTok.
Oh, you can find it on TikTok too. Yeah, you can find
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
on TikTok. You absolutely
Let's
can.
let's talk about TikTok now.
Is there something specific about TikTok you would like to talk about?
Yeah, obviously about your dog.
You would like to talk about my dog? Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a it's a slightly surreal story, and to be honest, one that is a really nice contrast from the difficulties of what we were just talking about. You know, I spend a lot of my
Yeah.
time thinking about pretty complex things, then to have uh, the respite of thinking about a minute-long video bringing people joy. So yeah, so I have a dog. She's called Orange, and Orange is but I can't describe how much I just adore my dog, and people that have dogs will feel the same. You know, people that like animals have got a, I don't know, slightly crazy maybe, and you just love your animals so much. And so we have a dog. She's called Orange. She was rescued from North Macedonia 2 years ago, and she lived not a very nice life, um, but it culminated because somebody saw her get thrown out of the car, which is not very nice. And then the lovely lady Tina, who runs the Dogs Club Rescue in North Macedonia, saw her get thrown out, picked her up, and nursed her back to health. And a little while later, she was on a bus coming to our house. If you fast forward two whole years nearly, uh, we took a trip to Paris last month. So about a month ago, we went to Paris, and we thought, let's take Orange with us. So we did, and we got in the car. We drove from where we are to Folkestone, got in the Euro shuttle into France. We were drove to Paris. All good. 2 days later, so we were staying around an hour away from Paris. 2 days later, we drove into Paris with Orange. We thought we're going to take her around all the monuments. We're going to get some cute pictures that will be nice memories for us. And she walked around the whole of Paris. We did in that day around 30,000 steps. So with lots of little breaks for her little leggies and me carrying her sometimes. She made it through the day. She got a picture in front of all the monuments you could think of: the Basilica in Montmartre, the Louvre, the Notre Dame, the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe. She had a picture in front of all of them. And I think the thing that TikTok liked, the algorithm, the people of TikTok, is she was wearing a little beret in all of the pictures, an orange beret, because orange is the name. And then the one in front of the Eiffel Tower, she had a stripy top on, like mimes do, and a red sort of neckerchief. And we thought, my partner thought, let's post it on TikTok. And there was a trend on TikTok where you're packing your bag to go on holiday, and your dog says to you, "Have a nice time in wherever you're going." So we did that. Have a nice time in Paris. You then post a picture of yourself that says, "Thanks, you too." So we did that. And then the dog says, "Me too." And then you get a series of pictures of them wherever they're going. And this was Orange. So with her pictures in front of all the monuments in her lovely beret, looking like a French fashionista, found her way onto TikTok, and we are about 2.5 million views down the line of those videos. And Amanda's now taking great pride in making further videos of just sort of little bits of content. But yeah, about 2.5 million people saw my dog's trip to Paris and loved it. Absolutely loved it. I mean, we loved it, but I didn't think 2.5 million people would as well.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting. And what happened? What happened next when you returned? You got like a call from BBC
Yeah,
or?
yeah. So posted the video. It started to get a few 100,000 views. We went to bed. We said, okay, maybe we'll wake up. It'll be on 250,000. It'll stop there. We woke up. It was on about 400,000, and it just sort of kept going. And we got an email at one point from one of the local sort of news outlets online saying, we'd love to just post a story about Orange. So we said, yeah, sure, fine. And on the back of that, another news outlet, one of the local newspapers, had reached out to the person who'd written the first article and said, can you give us their contact details? We'd love to write a story about them. So they did. That sort of transpired over time to contact from the BBC World Service radio station, our local BBC News, and one of the big newspapers locally as well. So Orange ended up being on the front of the regional newspaper. Amanda was on the World Radio Service talking about Orange, and then our local BBC News came to our house and filmed an interview with us and with Orange about why she'd gone viral. So Orange had her 5 minutes of fame, I suppose, and absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And now she's back to normal life. I mean, the hilarious thing about it is she has no idea because she's a dog, right? She has no concept of what's going on. But yeah, I mean, it was just a pretty crazy 2 or 3 weeks that I've never experienced in my life, and I don't think I will ever experience in my life. Slightly surreal.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think about all these algorithms and the AI behind it, which probably drove the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, the way I was describing to you, that thinking about your impact on a million people, it's even less understandable than that, I think, to most normal sort of people, about how there's an intelligent system that sits behind, on the face of it, a simple app, right, where you just scroll, watch video, scroll. It's really simple interaction. But in doing that, it's assessing how long you spend watching a video. And then if it shows you a similar video, how long you spend watching that. And if you don't, what it brings up to you is maybe something that's completely opposite, completely random content. And it's analyzing every second you watch something, or every time you scroll, or how fast you scroll, or do you then go interact with that person's profile? Do you click on a hashtag of pets or something? And the amount of intelligence that can build up is truly mind blowing, I think. And then clearly there are also conversations about the ethics of it and the amount of personal data that those companies come into contact with, and what they do with that personal data, all of those sorts of questions. But I think it's sometimes I look back and I say 5 years ago I should have made a choice to do a degree in something cyber related, and then I could really understand the future of the world. I think I've got a general personal curiosity about these things, and read about these things and watch videos about these things, but I don't have that deep understanding that I sometimes wish I had about these things that are controlling my life. Quite honestly, all the recommendations are based on things I interacted with, and I think the craziest and sometimes scariest thing is, I'm sure this has happened to you. You might be talking to a friend about, I don't know, an Xbox, and then you go on your app and it's an advert for an Xbox or an Xbox game, and you, whoa, what's going on here? But it's yeah, I mean, the algorithms are the they feel like one of the most important things in the world right now in terms of controlling news, sort of what you interact with, content, how people make decisions, those sorts of things is fascinating, right?
Yes, it is. It really is. Let's speculate about the future of these technologies. How likely do you think is AI replacing, people like me in my job as a teacher, or people like you in your job?
Yeah.
Maybe even replacing Orange one day. Like you can have a robot dog or something. Yeah,
Yeah, you have RoboDog.
robot dog.
RoboDog, yeah. I mean, it's I guess the question is quite complicated, because if the question was a purely technical question of, do these technologies and systems have the ability to be more productive, more powerful, more efficient, better in some ways than humans at various jobs, tasks, and responsibilities? The simple answer is yes, right? I guess the interesting question is then when you think about how social change happens. And, if you go back to, I don't know, the Industrial Revolution, when machines are being implemented and taking people's jobs, there were people that would essentially protest against that, right? And they would try to ruin the machines. Now, we were talking about far less intelligent machines, but relative to the time, pretty intelligent.
No, true. I'm just laughing because I thought, how could you,
How do
destroy
you stop a
TikTok or
robot?
something? How,
Yeah,
that's not really
exactly.
possible.
No, and the difference is, right, the scale at which things happen now. So back in the day, in the Industrial Revolution, you were talking about one factory in a town of a few thousand people, maybe. So you can mobilize a resistance against that. How do you resist TikTok? I don't know how many millions of users TikTok has worldwide, or Facebook, or Instagram, or the whole meta
Only
family.
only the Chinese government knows.
Yeah, possibly so, possibly so. And I don't know how you mobilize change against that and how you mobilize a resistance against that. But I think these machines have the capability of doing that. There are some things that they're not very good at, so they don't have very good fine motor skills at the moment. They're not very good at doing kind of intricate tasks that humans can do with their fingers and thumbs. In all likelihood, they will get better at that. There's no reason to think not. But I can, if I think about my job now, I could. So if I've written something that I'm taking to a board of directors for approval, I could copy and paste what I've written into one of the AI sort of options and say, please, can you write me a paper in a similar style with recommendations, but on the following topic, covering these key points. And in less than a minute, it will write me my paper. So we're now in the stage, aren't we, of thinking, okay, well, how do we master this technology? How do we harness it and use it alongside the jobs that we do? And I think the interesting question is, how, when, or do we get out of that phase, and how does that happen? Does it happen that we almost put, every time you tell AI something, it's learning again and again and again, and just building this infinite amount of knowledge and based on code, right? Does that happen at such a rate that it then supersedes the ability of us to control and harness and work with that technology? Or does it get to a point where governments, tech companies, powerful people in the world say, we have to constrain this in one way or another? Or does it happen that the opposite happens and people say, no, we have to do more of this AI stuff, more of this tech stuff, and then normal people that would be losing their jobs, what do? Do they mobilize against this? How do you mobilize across the world? It's not as easy as living in a village or a town of a few thousand people. So it has the capability. I don't think I don't think social change usually happens in a linear way. They're usually a bit up and down, and you've got some struggles and difficulties. I think the difficult point, though, if we were having a conversation about how you work with AI and tech to make best public services the best, businesses the best, healthcare the best, anything, the people that are well informed and intelligent enough to have the conversation are usually not involved in the conversation, because they are usually the owners of OpenAI or Grok or
Yes.
Google with Gemini, and they are not. They're thinking about maybe their own personal endeavors and wants to revolutionize the world with tech, but also thinking about presumably the billions of dollars they can make from these companies. So there's an interesting question, I think, about where this goes and how we work with, and whether it just supersedes us. And then the other bit is, what happens if it reaches that point of critical capability where you can't stop? You can't unplug AI, so to speak. So what happens if it becomes more conscious in that sense? But I think at the moment people have a craving for some humanness, and technology can't feel and think and interact with people. I think it would be interesting to see how people think about that in 20, 30 years' time. Do people care about that? I still care about the human interaction I have. I still care about working with people face to face and talking and going for lunch. Maybe in 20, 30 years' time, people won't mind, and they'll be happy to technologicalize their life.
Yeah, I think things are going to be totally different, but I can't really imagine how exactly the
Yeah,
society will function with technologies that we can't even imagine today. It's like
yes,
50 years ago, who could imagine, iPhones or OpenAI or, ChatGPT and all the other things that we have today.
yeah.
Um,
I think the thing that's clear is there's no going back, right? You can't undo the change that we've made. So the question at least has to be, how do we make this work for the collective good? Essentially, there's a really interesting guy, I forgot his name, who works for Google as one of their sort of leading technologists on AI and sort of emerging developments. And he firmly sits in the camp of, this can be really good for society and really good for humans. But there are things that we have to do in how we create this to make it sort of realize that good. And you're right? It has both untapped potential and risks that you can't even imagine. It's so potentially big that we just don't have big enough brains to even think about what it could do.
absolutely.
So it's interesting in that way, but it's clearly possible to do something fantastic with it, but equally possible that something the complete opposite happens,
Like
really. But
something can go wrong,
yeah, and
like with Brexit, for example.
this
This
I
was
guess
my next question. My next question.
the challenge with these things, right, is everything at the moment depends on who controls the input of those algorithms or of AI. So if you want to use AI to a immoral, illegal, questionable end, you can. You absolutely can. But you can use it for good. And that's I think it's nicer for my own consciousness to think about the good most of the time, because the opposite is quite depressing, I suppose. But you would like to think it works better. And before you ask me about Brexit, the thing
And
that
Boris Johnson, maybe also about Boris Johnson. I'm not sure yet.
we'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes. There's a really interesting question, right, about the use of data and technology in politics as well. Really interesting. But the thing that I think is really hard when you think about tech and AI change is you think about the things that people were predicting in, I don't know, the 1980s or something. By 2020, we're all in flying cars and living on the moon and had robot dogs, and we all wore, astronaut outfits and things. Well, that didn't happen. And then you think about maybe more modern shows like Black Mirror, and it feels so dark and extreme. And then you will see the odd news story about, there was a Black Mirror episode that the premise was that everybody had a social score, right? And you could see people's social score. And there was a story, I don't know, the past few years, where in China, if you litter or jaywalk across the road, your social score goes down. So, there is some of these things maybe are happening, stroke will happen, but it is so hard to imagine because, like I said, we're not in flying cars. We don't live on Mars. We don't live at the moon. The world has changed a lot since the 1980s, right? Probably not in the way that people thought in the 1980s. So it's so difficult to envision.
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Brexit because Brexit was the main reason I moved to the UK, and I lived with Brexit for so many years. It was like Brexit, 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 every day Brexit, Brexit in the UK. And here we are, a few years after Brexit. We are still alive, things are doing more or less pretty well. And what do you think about Brexit?
I think a lot of things about Brexit, some probably more complicated than others. The first thing I think, and I go back to the very first thing you asked me, why are you learning Polish, is about my partner and her family and how that felt at the time of, a country that they had lived in since 2005. It felt like in 2016, even though, it was a small margin in the election, in the referendum, but it felt like the country was saying, we don't want you anymore. The school you'd been to and sort of learned through, the university that you'd gone to, the jobs that you were starting to get in has been a member of society like any other member of society, irrespective of where they were born or what their family lineage was. It felt like the UK was projecting them, and that was more so in other parts of the UK than others. So you could sense, I think, if you drove from London to the most northern point of the UK, you would see in different towns, villages, cities, the level of rejection or embracement of people from other countries, other communities that speak different languages, that follow a different religion. You could observe that, and I had the immediate sort of experience of being able to see my partner and her family, I guess, go through that level of uncertainty. And so, in the UK, they set up a system called the EU settlement scheme. And depending on how long you'd been in the UK and various complicating factors, you received a status if you applied. Now, we were fortunate and have never had a problem since that. Everybody in the family had EU settled status. So they're okay. Everything continues as normal, right? Yeah. But just that period of anxiety and uncertainty and thinking, what's going to happen? That human impact was difficult, and I tried to help them manage by helping them apply for the settled status and helping them, feel like it wasn't a total rejection, I suppose, from the country that they, Amanda and her sister, England is home. For her parents, less so. They grew up a good proportion of their life in a different country, but they've made it home for the past 20 years. But Amanda and her sister, it's home. That's all they really know. In the same way, it's all I know. So that was difficult. I think the other, and this is more human, I think, as well than necessarily political. I think the conversation around Brexit, the EU, was just so distorted. It didn't feel like it was based on fact. It didn't feel like it had any real complexity, to be honest. It felt very binary. You were either in or you were out. You were either pro-immigration or anti-immigration. You were either pro-EU or anti-EU. And you had to sit in one of those camps. And a referendum is literally a yes or a no answer. That's the entire premise. We don't really have referenda very often in England or in the UK at all. It's not a normal mode of political engagement. So it felt like a really unusual experience in that sense. And I think it pulled people apart. And I think what it did in that process is it basically made people fall in. If you're in the yes or the no camp, the pro or the against camp, it pulled both of those sort of camps of people apart and meant that there was no real conversation about some of the points in there that could be had and may be valid. I think that a significant. I think if you looked at data and you looked at why people voted, whichever way they voted, there were probably two deciding factors. One is that you thought the EU was essentially value for British taxpayers' money, and you got more than you paid in. That's sort of the logic, and what comes with that is the ability to travel freely and all the things that we know about the EU. I think a lot of people would have thought about that, and then the other and probably most decisive factor is immigration. And you were pro or you were against, as I've said. And I think what that did is the conversation couldn't actually get into what people meant by being pro or anti-immigration. I think if you was to boil it down, if you were pro, you were more thinking about the morality and the ethics, and you were more thinking about maybe some kind of human rights, maybe not in the sort of UN sense, but just the rights of people to live and work and enjoy a good life. And if you were anti-immigration, you were maybe concerned about the loss of cultural identity. You were concerned about people not integrating into society, and so feeling like there was multiple camps sitting across society in England. And you were maybe concerned about things like the number of people accessing healthcare and what that meant for you, the number of people applying to school and what that meant for your child, and things like that. So I think that conversation just got completely distorted. And what essentially I think probably happened is, if you think about the political arguments that were made, they played to both of those things. So if you were concerned about immigration and culture and access to schools or healthcare, the narrative was immigrants are the reason you can't get a GP appointment. Immigrants are the reason that your child's school classroom is too big and they've got no time to spend with each of the children. Or immigrants are, the reason that you don't feel safe in your community because there's a Polish camp there, there's a French camp there, that whatever it was. And that felt like that was the story that was told. On the flip side, it was immigrants are not to blame for your problems, and your inability to access healthcare is not because of immigration, it's because of political choices that were made, lack of investment, whatever that might look like. And so the respective arguments, so if you were the Remain crowd or the Leave crowd, you were only talking to your camp. You weren't trying really to, clearly from an electoral point of view, they were clearly trying to convince people to vote for them because that's how you win. But there wasn't, I think what that conversation needed to be was one about how the country works and the validity in some of the fears that people had, and it needed to be a large conversation. But it wasn't. It was a what can we weaponize to win an argument, and that's how it felt. Felt like it sort of lacked some of that complexity. And then the third thing that I think about Brexit, and I think about it sort of retrospectively, is it has proven to be, in one sense, as you said, we're all still alive. We're all still, I can travel to Poland. I have to wait a bit longer in the passport queue, and I get a stamp in my passport now. That's a new experience. In fact, they I don't know if you've been to a Polish airport lately, but they were taking my picture. They were making me sort of stand in front of the webcam, and it was a bit of a weird experience, to be honest. Just having a border guard stare at you. So that has changed a little bit. But on a larger scale, if you think about things going on in the world right now, it's had a negative impact on us economically at a time when politics and world affairs are complicated and becoming polarized. We're in a worse position because we're not part of an organization that's got another 27 member states. And that makes it sort of more complicated in that way. And the benefits that were professed to be achieved through Brexit haven't materialized. There is no evidence for any of them. And that plays to the fact that the arguments weren't serious. They were about winning something. And if all politics is about your party, your camp winning, that can't be good enough. It has to be about the betterment of people's lives, and it didn't feel like that debate was. So if you look at data now, the vast majority of people in this country believe that Brexit was a disaster, and they believe that it hasn't delivered benefits, and actually a majority of people think we should rejoin the EU in one way or another. And I'm not sure if people have thought about whether that's a customs union like you would have with Norway or Switzerland, or whether it's a full membership. Ultimately, it seems that full membership is pretty much off the cards for at least the foreseeable future. But it was a complicated time. It was a really uncertain time, and I think it could have been so much different, but it wasn't at all. At all. Were you in the UK at the time of the debate and the vote?
No, no, I was in Poland, but I was observing all these things very closely. And when the British people voted to leave, I decided I would move to the UK.
So you made the opposite choice to a lot of people, I think, right?
Yes,
Most people
yes,
thinking
yes,
leave.
yes,
Oh.
yes.
Why
And
did you
I
make
think
that
this
choice?
because I thought if the richest country or one of the most developed countries in the EU leaves in the Union, then the Union is going to be weaker, and countries like Poland are going to be in a worse position. But so many things happened after Brexit, and the whole geopolitical situation now is totally different. But I still think it's too early to say if Brexit was a good or a bad decision, because it's extremely complicated, and I think it's going to take a few more years, maybe even 10 years, before we can say if the UK will be stronger or weaker. I think it's too late. Sorry, I think it's too early to say. Yeah, but yeah, and I need to apologize to Boris Johnson because unfortunately we don't have time to talk about him today.
I think enough people are talking about our former Prime Minister.
Yeah, but just last few words, if you could tell, there's so many men around the world in your situation who learn Polish because of same reason you do. Can you give them a few pieces of advice, from your own experience for all these years when you were surrounded by the language in a way, and also now when you started learning it, um, can you just give them,
I
some
think I
hope,
can try
some
to give
hope?
it. Yes, and you will need lots of hope, and you will need lots of commitment and perseverance, and um, you will need to be able to find your small wins within this complicated journey of learning Polish. Um, I mean, is it true Polish is the hardest or one of the hardest languages in the world to learn?
It is for non-Slavic speakers, yeah, for
Okay,
non-Slavic people, it really is. Yeah.
yes. And that's my experience too. It's hard. It's really hard. And you have to want to learn. So if you're sat there and you're thinking, I need a Polish teacher, I need a, I need to do a course, I need to buy a book, and it's something you really want to do, my first advice would be do it. I think doing it, and I've tried lots of ways of learning Polish, from apps to buying books to use. The hard thing about doing it by yourself is that you don't have somebody to rationalize things with. So we have many conversations about why Robbie went turns to Robbie Wash, and all of these things. And that's something that really helps me to understand and to have that conversation and unpack why something is the way it is. And sometimes, most of the time, you've got an explanation. Sometimes it just is. And sometimes, you can live with that. But if you've got a book and you're reading it and you're going on Translate or something, it's quite hard to understand the reason behind things. So I think having a structured approach to learning and a plan for learning is absolutely essential. But the first key ingredient is you have to want to do it, because it's difficult, because it takes a long time. Um, and you have to find what your motivation is. So my motivation is my partner, but less so her, because we speak in English together. More so, one, whenever I go to family events or meet a babcha, I want to be able to say a bit more than hello, how are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you? I want to do more than that. I want to feel more part of the conversation. On the other side, I feel a little bit like I owe them something in a way. They've accepted and embraced me more than I could ever hope for. They've welcomed me into their family and treat me like their family, normally almost. And I think I owe it to them to try and integrate myself more within their family. And one of the key ways you can do that, you can't integrate without communication, right? So one of the ways I can do that is by learning and being able to be part of the conversation around the table more, whether it's just Sunday or it's Easter or it's Christmas. So you have to find your motivation, and you have to stick to it. And when it's tough, you have to remind yourself that that's why you're doing it, that it's for a greater good, and you will get there. I think another piece of advice I would give is that you really have to try and find ways to immerse yourself and sort of entertain yourself within it. And if all you're doing is reading or repeating a word, you might struggle. But if you're listening to something, if you're watching a show with subtitles, whatever you might be doing, I think you have to find different ways of stimulating your brain to learn in different ways. And as you know, I find listening so hard. If you give me a script to read, I'm fine. But
Not only
listening,
you, not only you.
and it's really hard, right? And you said this to me, and it's absolutely true. The words in front of you are the words in front of you. They don't lie. They're always the same. But when somebody says it, the speed at which they say it, their accent, the order of the sentence, whatever it might be, might just throw you off. So you have to find a different way. And I think if you can immerse yourself in real life conversation, good, even better. Or just trying to, and I've been trying to do this lately, use words. If Amanda says something to me in English, can I respond with a couple of Polish words, just to train my brain a little bit into how to do it? And I think the final bit of advice I would give, and it's based on my experience, is it's really easy to disconnect and not understand and rely on your partner as the translator. And you will have to do that for a while, right? I mean, I've been doing it for a long time. I will still have to do it. And there'll be points where in 6 or 12 months' time, I'm better at Polish, but I still need to say to somebody, what does that mean in English? You know, can you help me out? And that's fine. But for too long, I disengaged from conversations that I don't understand, which makes sense because I literally don't know what's going on. I can't even begin to work out what is being said. But the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to break that habit, and the easier it becomes to just reinforce that behavior constantly. So when I listen to things, I can disengage so easily because I've been doing it in the conversations in the living room, in the kitchen, because I don't know what's happening. The more you remain active in the conversation, try to understand the bit you understand, maybe ask your partner, what's that other bit mean? You will build a better habit and be able to get there over time. And I guess my final bit of advice would be think about what your goal is ultimately. And I think I've got two. One is I want to be around the Christmas table this year and able to engage more. And I want to be able to engage more in the conversation. So I've got a little while left. I've got about 9 months to continue. And I know I'm not going to be perfect, but I want to do more. And to do that, I'm structuring my plan accordingly. I learn words every day. I have conversations with my AI now, which is slightly crazy. But there are multiple ways that you can go about it. But think about your goal. So mine is that I want to be able to converse around the Christmas table this year, or last year at the Christmas table. We played bingo, and I know most of my numbers, but I was just so nervous and not confident in my knowledge of it that I couldn't engage. So if we play bingo next year, I want to know my numbers. I know my numbers, but I want to be able to be part of it and kind of immerse myself there. And then my second goal is less for. So I've got a goal that's based on other people ultimately, right? I want to be part of their life, their family, immersed in their culture. But my personal goal, I find history and politics fascinating. I've always really enjoyed the interwar period between World War I and World War II, and then into the Cold War period. And Poland's a pretty interesting place to think about within that context. So I would love to be able to pick up a history book or an article about something in the 1980s in Poland. Imagine if I could read a book about Solidarność in Polish, like that. The ability to do that, I think, would be good, and that's for me. You know, Amanda doesn't care if I read a book about something in Polish, but I do, and that would bring me fulfillment and satisfaction. So you have to find your goal and structure around that. Remain committed, persevere. I think is the hardest bit. It's tough, right? And you have to be realistic with yourself that it is hard, and it will be hard, and you will at points go, "Oh, I can't do this." You can do it, and just in a few months, I've built so much more confidence in using Polish and not judging my Polish and kind of just experimenting, and also with building confidence that I will get there around that Christmas table. I will get there. I will be having some semblance of conversation about something that's not just me asking for the zupa, or do I want another beer, or whatever.
No, you will. You definitely will, because you are so well motivated that I'm sure you will. Yeah. Yeah. All right, mate. Let's finish in a British way. Yeah, it was extremely interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
That's okay.
See you in the next one.
See you in the next one.